Okay, thank you for attending the BattleCry Greenlight presentation. My name is Evan Schwartz. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So what are my qualifications to get BattleCry built? I've been developing and leading development teams for more than 25, 30 years now. I'm currently the head of technology for North America for AMCS Group, and I manage all the architecture, I manage all the developments, database side, web services side, web deployments, and even mobile technologies for this company. So that gives me a unique perspective from a business solutions to be able to technically, administratively get this done. Early in my career, back in the 80s and 90s, when bulletin board systems sort of ruled the reign, they were the early version of the internet. I started a game company, and I created some flagship games, Battle Grid, Fields of Battle, Dark Harvest, things of that nature. And those were very, very successful in their day. And even when BBSs started to phase out, when the internet came, I shifted gears and developed a company for making games using Common Gateway Interface, CGI, at the time for the web. And we released 2 flagship products, Blood Quest, Vampire Chronicles, and Galactic Fleet Wars, which was sort of a war strategy game. So I'm not new to the gaming business world. I'm not new to the software development world, for business or for entertainment. So there's a lot of years of skill and practice that I bring to bear to be able to get this done, and I've been exposed in numerous ways to all of the technologies that we're going to need to use in BattleCry to get it done. So what is BattleCry, right? The inspiration behind BattleCry and the reason why we wanted to even begin to make BattleCry was to involve the player into the game in a way that we haven't seen before. I wanted the player to be a part of the game, not just an avatar, not a facsimile or something mental that I can move, right? We have to have the player mentally into the game. But I wanted something tangible, something the player was in this game, to make it more personal, right? To give that player a stronger connection to the game. And voice seemed like the easiest way. It could be digitized, it could be transported into the virtual world space, the game world space, and used there, right? It was something tangible. But we needed it to be something more than just a recording of my voice. I wanted it to be a real mechanic, to have real impact and force in the game. So that's where the BattleCry came in. Our research showed there were some games out there that used voice to jump, and even an earlier prototype I built used voice to fuel a ship. And when I showed that around, well, it was interesting, right? That was neat. But it didn't really connect to the user because it didn't make sense. How am I using my voice to make the guy jump? Why would my voice do that? So it took a little bit of wheel turning and chin stroking to come up with the concept of using voice to summon a horde. Right, that's a fairly common narrative in the barbarian mythos, that they can summon hordes. Well, how do they do it? Well, hordes don't summon themselves, right? That's the tagline. They're summoned with a battle cry, and that basically those two concepts linked up. And that's sort of how BattleCry came to be, is that you're using your voice, and we're using a complex algorithm under the hood to basically analyze your voice and produce your army. And then that army is in a conquest and a competition. But we want to take it even further than that. So now I'm vested. My voice is in the game. I'm seeing it do something that makes sense to me as a player in the game. And but now I need to connect to my opponent. And one of the things that's very unique for human beings is speech, right? That's uniquely human trait, and it's primordial, right? It really we can really move people with our words and our voice. So I wanted to make sure that the players could connect at that level, that I could hear what the other player's battle cry is that was moving his units and summoning his horde, and that opponent could hear my battle cry and could respond to it. And now it feels more like I'm fighting my opponent, not just some mechanics in the game. So when we put that together, a prototype, and we built it to where just to create a game, right? You're screaming to see who goes first, right? There was no real battle, there was no units, and it really appealed to particularly young and young adult males. There was just something highly attractive to them about being able to scream something into their phones and affect another person, right? So that really kind of connected with something deep within us as human beings that really allows us to connect with the game. So the executive summary of this is to leverage something that I can do, that only I can do, my voice, to produce a horde to attack an opponent in a game of strategy. You have all the same standard mechanics and strategy of gameplay, such as moving your units around and fighting terrain and all the typical strategic things that draw people to those types of games. But ultimately, we wanted to sort of touch something that had not been touched within a player on a primordial level that connected them to the game. So the game design is going to be fairly simple. You'll understand the mechanics and the why of, but essentially, as I talked about the inspiration, the collection of the voice and using it as a way to drive the mechanics, the conjuring of units within the game to do conquest. So the general game mechanics are: I use my BattleCry, I summon my army, I make a strategic decision, so now I'm back into more traditional game styles, right? It's not such an outlier or so unique that I can't find familiar mechanics within the game. And I'm moving my units across this procedurally generated game board to get across to the other side to attack my opponent's capital and defeat them, and then that's how we win. It's very casual in play. The actions are essentially use your BattleCry to summon your units, pick which territories you want to attack. There's opportunities to add some flavor to it. I can find or acquire heroes that have certain mechanics. I can pick certain units do better in certain terrains. So I have some, meaningful choices from a player perspective that I have to use to be able to maneuver and attack spaces. These spaces have resource values, and from turn to turn I collect these resources that allow me to build buffs and enhance my heroes and do things that will fortify my territory that I've captured, preserve it, in my ultimate goal to get to the other side and attack. So I'm building and maneuvering all of my pieces around from a feedback loop, so I'm doing my defensive move and positioning my front lines. I'm conquering new territory, and I'm buffing and updating my heroes. And we sort of go through that rinse and repeat, and then the player takes their turn. An interesting point to make sure is that we're going to be able to see the other player's turn. Since it's going to be a turn-based game, I take my turn, I log out, they log in, they take their turn, I'm notified, hey, it's your turn. I can go back in and I can actually see that player take their turn. So that's essentially the grind through the game. We built a prototype. I've got a link here. That's a 30-minute video, so I'll let you look at that offline. I'll spare you of that today. So take a chance to look at that, but essentially it's demonstrating the mechanic of talking into or screaming into or using your voice to generate a value that determine whether or not you go first. This sort of speaks to a C-level feature that we may institute into the game called the BattleCry Gymnasium, which isn't really tied to the game or creating a game or moving units around on the board to do conquest, where is it more tied to just practicing your battle cry and it running through the algorithm and giving you some feedback and giving the player the ability that they're mastering the mechanic. Right? So because we're using such a novel mechanic, doing some research on this particular game was a little more challenging. There's a game out there called Scream Go Hero, where, as I said before, you're just screaming into your phone, making the guy jump up and down. It has a lot of interest. You see tons of downloads, but very little revenue being generated from it. You kind of have to ask yourself, well, why that is. In our little focus group, when we went around and started to test this out with our voice fuel prototype, the first prototype of this, where it was fueling the ship, again, everyone thought, wow, that's neat, but it wasn't engaging, right? It didn't engage them into the game. But the the juxtaposition of that is when we built the prototype specifically for creating a new game of BattleCry. So in that prototype, I'm not playing the game. I'm not moving my units around and conquering territory. I'm literally just, who did you win or I win? I'm screaming into this, and you get to go first, right? That's the entirety of that prototype, just to sort of prove out that all the server infrastructure and piping and all that stuff was working. And literally, it turned into a game of itself of haha. And I had hundreds of these games where they were just creating it back and forth to see who won. That told me that now that's engaging. Right now, I've taken the mechanic and created an engaging reason, a compelling reason to play. So we're convinced that the mechanic itself is a strong mechanic. It's novel, so it's going to be something new in the industry, and that's going to be its unique selling point. So then we fall back onto what is the traditional strategy style game where I'm moving units on a board, conquering territory. So we went to comparables from that perspective, Risk, Global Destination, and Warlords of Adernum. We use Sensor Tower to gather these marketing statistics, and the feedback is extremely positive. Even Risk, which in this case was just really had some problems in the game. It was such a for-profit model that it kind of turned a lot of people off. Had high volumes, made about $20K a month in general revenues, but it wasn't a really engaging concept. It turned people off. The negative reviews, which I don't show here, but they're in the deeper mechanics, and I can pull those up if we need to talk about them, really gets to the fact that it has a short-term win to it following those mechanics and those strategies, but ultimately turns the player off when it goes too far in its revenue model and turns into a pay-to-win type of game, and people tend to reject it after that. Warlords of Adernum is a great balance of that. They have some really nice looking aesthetics. They've got some very clean mechanics for combat, which we're going to follow those same type of mechanics, and their volume to return on revenue is much higher. As you can see, they're averaging about 40,000 downloads a month, but they're getting about $100,000 in revenue a month. So there's a real strength behind the business plan on this, and that whether or not this is a profitable venture to move forward with. And they're very turn-based in their mechanics. So then it comes down to how can we market it. One of the things as an indie developer, because at the end of the day I'm a one-man shop, so I have to design it, build it, do the graphics on it. I can do some outside consulting. There's parts and pieces that I can draw on or pay to have others do drop-in opportunities, which we're going to leverage during the weaknesses side. But then when you get to the marketing and the promotion and the push in the app stores, you get a real sense that, man, that's a full-time job. Right, you building it. It's almost. I used to think it was a 60-40 split. I'm now flipping it around. 40% of the effort's to build the product. 60% of the effort, or even more than that, is to promote it, get it out in the market, and sell it. So, from my perspective, looking at a full-service publisher is a realistic avenue to investigate at the very least. I've asked for some boilerplate contracts from some of these publishers on what's their take, what do they do. I build the whole game, I design the thing, give it to you, white label it, you put your publisher logo on it, and then you publish it. What do I get? So still early in the development of that discussion. As a fallback, standard periodicals, we can invest a lot of resources into going into your Gamma Sutra, a lot of the game magazines, the review magazines, and almost all of them, and I guess this is debatable whether or not you consider this ethical. You can purchase ad space in those periodicals, and they'll give you a favorable review. So that at that point, you're paying for rent. And you can do the same thing in the App Store. You can go to Apple, you can go to Google. There are certain things that you can do to pay for that will bubble your game up in the rank. So it just comes down to a dollars and cents model. The money I'm investing, am I expecting to get that back? And we've got some volumes over money data that we've pulled in from Sensor Tower that'll give us that answer when we start to run that on the models in the spreadsheet. Social media. grassroots type of promotions are always really strong. Doing advertising, it's very affordable to push out through Facebook. You can really get granular to your market space. So if we have a true understanding, a user profile of who we're targeting, we can build that marketing plan in Facebook and Twitter and really start to broadcast that. Even Google Ads has some really strong tools to be able to do those adjustments and put that out the door. And then, of course, there's cross-pollination for in-game ads. There's almost every one of the strategic games that I reviewed for this research had some form of advertising in their free but in-game app purchases. What that means is that I'm already now advertising to that market, right? They're playing that game because they like strategy games. So we can then begin to target and really upsell our USP directly to a market of gamers that are playing a game that may be interested in our game. So that becomes a strong way to do that. The project plan, I've broken the entire plan up into 10 sprints. The sprint 1, which is largely already done, is the server layer. That's basically, we're going to host this up in Azure. I've got my SQL server up there. I've got all my web services built. And I'm able to pass data and information back and forth. Then sprint 2 is getting all the non-game boards, all the screens where I can move from screen transitions, get all my menuing right, to create my friends list. Can I do all the things I need to do within my game design document, from just menuing and starting a game, managing a game, reviewing a game, high scores, all of that. Get all of that side Chrome and administrative stuff of screen moving out of the way. Then at sprint 3, we're going to do all the roster mechanics. That's where we start to build in the actual functioning mechanics to where I can start a game, look at a game, I get alerts to tell me that there's a game available for me to play, it's my turn or not my turn. All of that stuff is going to kind of go through. We're going to build some scripts at the SQL side that can load those tables with that data to create those scenarios so that we can have our test scripts go through and test out each one of those scenarios. Sprint 4 is really where the rubber meets the road. At that point, I've got all my games, my mechanics. They can start, they can end. I can have friends. I can get alerts, all of that stuff. So now I can actually get into the game mechanics. Here's my map being generated. I've got my battle cries are moving my units across the board. I'm taking terrains. We're going to do lightweight at this point. It's just get to where I can take territory and do combat. A standing garrison versus an attacking horde that I've conjured, and make sure that all the combat rules work and really kind of play test those. I don't want to get too much of the terrain mechanics in place. I don't want to get too much of the movement mechanics in place, so that I can focus heavily on just testing the combat and run a variety of simulations and make sure that everything's well balanced. Once we've got done with that, we go into the conquest. That's really where I'm literally taking territory for a reason. I'm collecting resources. The terrain is starting to have an impact on combat mechanics, movement mechanics, things of that nature, and I can acquire heroes. So now I can start to add these buffs into my combat system, which allows me to build on top of a combat system that's already been well tested at the unit level. So I can now really look at what my tests were from combat versus my new tests, including the buffs and the heroes, and make sure that they're properly balanced. I have a baseline with which to compare it to. At that point, I have pretty much the ability to move around the map. I've got my heroes, I've got my buffs, I've got my conquest, so I'm going to need to focus a little bit on my security layer, making sure that someone can't go in and attack my web services directly. That can mess up the game. Go back, review all of my terrain mechanics, make sure that they're properly being managed and I can move appropriately. I'm not moving outside the norm of from a conquered hex to the next one, so there's mechanics around that. Resource accumulation, again, give me my resources so I can spend them to upgrade my heroes. So before then, you're going to have unlimited money so that you can buy stuff and really kind of test it out. So now we're going to start to draw that stuff back, and you're going to have to accumulate it round and round. So now I get a sense of, am I generating enough revenue? Do my terrain values and resources need to be increased? All of that stuff. And that's at Sprint 8. Sprint 9 becomes the shop. So now that I've collected my resources, I can really start to test the mechanics at the shop level. There's going to be parts and pieces of the shop already in place to be able to test the buffs, but they're not going to have any constraints on whether I can buy it or not. I can buy as many as I want. So at this point, we're really now starting to wrench down. This is how much resources I've got. This is what's in the shop. Can I buy it? And then we need to really kind of model out the price points for those. Is that valid in the game as the game progresses? Do you reach a tipping point where you've overshot, and now I have so many resources I could buy everything in the shop, that type of stuff. And then it gets into final testing and final game review in Sprint 10. At that point, the game should be well polished and ready to release. So self-analysis. So one of the things that's going to be my strengths, just from the years of experience, is the administrative project management, being able to keep up with tasks, time management, and the technical aspect of the project. That's going to be my strength areas on being able to solve those problems. I have a proven track record of being able to solve those problems even with limited resources. So where we have risks and where my weaknesses lie is in the aesthetic or artistic aspect of the game. What's going to look good. I have, a color vision problem, which makes it sometimes difficult to see color problems. So I'm going to rely heavily on others around me that are more artistically inclined to give me feedback. And there may be an opportunity here where the strategy I'm going to take is to build it simple, build a block-out or a white-out version of it. We're going to follow Gestalt principles, UX designs. It doesn't have to look artistic to be able to follow those best practice design practices. And the whole purpose of that is to get it to a point where I can then consult out with artists to simply drop in the graphics, right? Because by that time, we've so well defined the constraints around all of the UI, around the combat system, the battle system, the units, and what they look like, that we should be able to give very specific requirements to an artist, get them mock-ups back quickly, pick which ones we think work best overall throughout the game, get them to render those, and then we're just dropping the graphics in place to give it that high-gloss pop and good and well-polished implementation. So that's BattleCry in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you greenlight the project, and I'm looking forward to building this. Thank you, and if you have any questions, please feel free to send them. Have a nice day.